Seen themselves. So I like the popcorn method. So I'm gonna popcorn this over to Abby Rankin.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Abby Rankin, class 2012, coming up with my 10-year reunion. That's scary, but exciting. This spring actually is when that is. I graduated, took 1 year off between undergrad and law school. I actually worked at the Macalester Library as the night manager, so the one who kicks you out when you're trying desperately to study for finals at 1 a.m. That was me. Not for you personally, obviously. It's been quite some time, but that was my role. And then took that year to kind of figure out what next steps looked like. Landed at Mitchell Hamlin School of Law, then William Mitchell, and finished that 2016. Then clerked for some judges for a couple of years, and now work as an assistant public defender for the state of Minnesota, handling appeals. So that's where I am.
Thank you, Abigail. Let's pass it over to Matthew Bergeron.
Uh, Good morning, everyone. My name is Matthew Bergeron. I'm an attorney in private practice at the law firm of Larkin Hoffman in Bloomington, Minnesota. I'm a Macalester class of 2008, and I went straight into law school after college. I mean, part of that was the circumstances. There weren't a whole lot of opportunities for a history and religious studies major at the onset of the Great Recession. So I went to law school straight away, took a leave for a semester to work on a campaign for governor, and then returned to law school as a part-time evening student while working in the government relations group of another law firm. I've spent a little time as staff at the Minnesota House of Representatives and have been at Larkin Hoffman now just over 7 years, where I have kind of built a blended legislative government relations practice. I represent a lot of clients in front of the state legislature, a little bit of local government work and a little bit of federal work. And then I have a practice kind of in the regulatory and transactional space in healthcare, where I generally focus on representing Medicaid providers, so disability service providers, substance use disorder and mental health treatment providers, long-term care providers, anywhere where the state is the primary payer of the services is kind of my area of practice at this point.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. Dana Mitchell, would you like to go next?
Of course. So my name is Dana Mitchell. I'm not a Macalester graduate, but my connection is that my daughter is a freshman at Macalester. And so I wish I had known about Macalester at the time, but here I am. I think it is a brilliant school. I went to the University of Minnesota, where I earned a liberal arts degree. Then I pursued a joint degree in law and social work. I was a Bush Fellow pursuing my MSW, and I've been a lawyer for about 25 years. Most of those years have been in the public sector, where I've done a number of different things. So I've worked on with a monitor's office for a $2 billion lawsuit filed by Black lawyers, Black farmers. The last 16 years, I've been with the Ramsey County Attorney's Office, where I've been a prosecutor, employment law, civil practice, you name it. I'm currently the vice president of Minnesota Association of Black Lawyers, and I also teach at St. Thomas Law School. One class. I used to also teach at Mitchell Hamlin, and I'm a mentor. I'm a mentor to a lot of students, whether undergrad, but mostly law students. And so that's what I do.
Wonderful. I'm so happy we have a parent, Dana, and it's so great to hear your community involvement as well. Thank you for joining us. All right, let's round out our introductions with Betsy Temple.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here. Sorry I was a few minutes late. Apparently I'm falling back into my undergraduate ways. I graduated in 2002 with a double major in music and religious studies, thinking that I would eventually go on to grad school in musicology. And I worked in the music library at Carleton for a couple of years after I graduated and did some freelance piano teaching and odds and ends things. And then as a child of the 90s, when things just looked a lot different than they did even a few years later in 2008, I just kind of thought, I'll go to law school. It'll probably work out fine. And it did. I graduated from the University of Minnesota in 2007. I did a year-long clerkship with, I was one of the final clerks of Chief Justice Russell Anderson, who retired toward the end of my clerkship. I was in private practice at Dorsey and Whitney for about 6 years in the finance and restructuring group. So some bankruptcy work and a lot of lending, commercial lending work. So representing banks and corporate and commercial borrowers in loan transactions, which is kind of my core specialty. And after a few years of that, I went in-house to US Bank, where I've been for almost 8 years. And I now lead a team of 9 lawyers, including me, who supports the business line that handles our kind of largest business clients and working on their loan work. Do a fair amount of pro bono and work with our DEI efforts and so forth. So I guess I'm the business representative here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Betsy. It is such a great opportunity, and I know we have 48 minutes or less than together. And so students, please put your questions in the chat. If you feel if you would like to direct this, message them to Marcos or I, feel free to do that as well. If you want to raise your hand, we empower you to do that as well. Because we have 4 great panelists with such different paths, and they also have different specialties, and their day-to-day might look a little different, and their experiences are very unique and different. I don't expect every single panelist to respond to a question, but we'll definitely be watching out for that body language and or people to respond to questions too. I'm eager. I say eager a lot. I'm just really excited for us to have a fluid conversation and for students to get those questions answered. So I'll kick us off, but I look forward to seeing those questions in the chat or students raising their hands. So each of you talked a little bit about your degree, and maybe you realized when you were in school that you wanted to pursue a career in the legal profession. But can you share, maybe it was an experience or an aha moment, but what was it what was that moment that you were like, all right, I'm going to start studying for the LSAT, I'm going to apply for law school? What was that moment for you?
I'll go. This is Dana Mitchell. I didn't know any lawyers. I knew a lot of people who worked for the county. My mom was a nurse practitioner at the University of Minnesota. My dad was a psychologist. My grandmother was a community activist. And I saw the power of being able to improve people's lives. And I thought that was incredibly important. But I didn't see that they had the authority to really make those things happen. And so I started looking at law as a vehicle by which you could get things done. And so that therein lies how I got a joint degree in social work and law. So it was really towards my junior year that I said, I need to do something with this liberal arts degree that I have. I so appreciate my liberal arts degree. I draw on it all the time. I learned so much about myself. I learned so much about the world. And what I tell students that I teach is that you need to be the person who is always curious, because you are going to encounter people that are so different from you, and you need to be able to be curious, to be able to relate, and be able to make the changes that they're asking you to do. And that's what a liberal arts degree allows you to do, is to draw on all these disciplines and try to make sense of it for the people that you're trying to help.
Thank you, Dana. I love that you're touching on the liberal arts education as well. That's so important, and we see that in a lot of data and reporting. Does anybody else want to touch on their aha moment?
I do a little bit, and I think it actually kind of ties in with the question we just got from Claire in the chat. Mine wasn't so much of an aha moment, so much as a process. Like Dana, I was interested in potentially looking at social work. I didn't, but I was looking at I was a philosophy major, psychology minor. I transferred to Mac actually, so I probably would have been a double major if I could have, if I didn't have the time. But I knew I was interested in the overlap between the legal system and psychological concerns. So honestly, where those come up a lot either would be probate, so people who can't handle their own issues, or the criminal court system, which I specifically call the criminal court system, not the criminal justice system. But the criminal court system ended up being where I felt more drawn. And I also, in looking at myself, thought that I would be better able to carry burdens of other people in that aspect of life rather than in being a private practitioner in psychology. I didn't know that I had the personal power to draw those boundaries and be able to leave that work at work. Turns out I'm not great at leaving my current work at work either, but I think it's a little less mentally unhealthy than I would have been had I been in psychology. I think that question that Claire asked, how did your goals going into law school compare to what you do now? I think that's huge. I think knowing why you're going to law school is paramount. Maybe you won't experience this. The economy wasn't as bad as for me as it was for Matthew, but it's still not great. But I did definitely get a lot of like, are you sure? Like, maybe don't go to law school, maybe don't do this, from lawyers, from professors, and it wasn't a reflection on me. I didn't know that then. I saw it as a challenge. Like, oh no, I'll do it. I'll prove them wrong, right? So if you hear that from people, know that it's not a challenge. Know that or if it is a challenge, it's one to look at yourself and to look at your goals and to know why you want to go to law school. It's not just because I have a philosophy degree and I don't want to work in a coffee shop. Working in a coffee shop is great, not long term, but it's great. But you got to figure out what's driving you. For me, that was helping people who have mental illness to, or who are impacted by mental illness to get through some process that they were unfamiliar with that I could be a guide in. I now work not in the trial process, but on the back end of that after conviction. But a lot of my clients do suffer from many co-occurring disorders. So I do still see that in my daily practice, that goal of being able to shepherd people through this process that is otherwise quite alien and intimidating, is still a very large part of the reason that I do this work, if not, quite frankly, one of the only reasons that I do it. So I think it's really important to have a sight on why you're doing this and not just have it be because I need a job, which is valid. I mean, if that's it, great. Just know that you're going to have to pursue it that way instead of an emotional way. And to keep that in mind as you go, because I think that having that purpose really makes the slog of law school easier. And it makes it a little bit more realistic to know what you're aiming for at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, if I might build just a little bit off of that, I had a kind of two parts. Like I had a very clear aha moment for me. I was a junior at Macalester. I was living in the house next to the Dairy Queen, and I was watching election results in 2006. And I, at that point, was trying to decide whether I was going to go into coaching. I was an assistant coach at for a varsity basketball team at a local high school, or I wanted to be a speechwriter. And maybe that's because I came into my adulthood and the peak of the West Wing. But Sam Seaborn was a lawyer and a speechwriter. And so I thought, well, then that's what I should be. So I was debating law school or a career in basketball as a coach. And I could not turn off, I couldn't turn off the election coverage in 2006 that night. I mean, and I was like Googling and learning about races in the West Coast that were going to determine them. It was like I couldn't stop. And that moment kind of moved me a little bit. But to Ms. Rankin's point, like one of my biggest problems is I went to law school with no thought that I wanted to practice law. Like I did not have a very clear reason for being there. And school had always kind of come somewhat naturally, like I have a brain that works in kind of that way that fits with the kind of traditional teaching methodology. So like it just kind of was a thing. And law school is a different animal to some extent. And so I got to law school and I did not have the academic success I had historically had in my life. despite putting in more work than I had ever put into my academics. And I didn't know why I was there, because thinking that I wanted to be like this, whatever, like now you're sitting in property law. I mean, it's one thing if I'm in constitutional law and I'm thinking about government and what it does, but like I'm taking contracts, I'm taking torts, and I'm trying to figure out, like, it just didn't reconcile for me. And frankly, that was part of the reason why, when the opportunity presented itself, I left law school for a term and worked on a campaign for governor. And when I came back, I knew why. And I also was no longer defining myself as a law student. I was defining myself as what I did, and I happened to go to law school at night. And that also took a lot of pressure off me to be hyper successful in law school, as I'd always tried to be successful in school. Now the school was a means to an end. And like my definition, my sense of self and my definition of success in that identity came from the work I was doing. And so it was a fundamentally different experience for me. So I guess my point is to echo, like, kind of know why, but it doesn't necessarily mean that like you know what kind of law you want to practice, because everybody walks in and either wants to be a criminal prosecutor or they want to do mergers and acquisitions, and almost nobody does those two things, right? But that's what, like, first year law students, 80% of them will answer one of those two things, right? And so it's not necessarily knowing what kind of law you want to practice, but it's having some sense as to why the practice of law lines up with kind of the way you're approaching that next phase of your life.
Yeah, and I'll jump in as somebody who very much had no idea what I was doing when I went to law school. And if it was a different environment then, and I now tell people, go to law school if you want to be a lawyer, and otherwise you shouldn't. I don't give the, hey, if you have a JD, you can do anything kind of advice, because there's often a lot of debt. But if you want to be a lawyer, go to law school. But I love practicing law. I think it was much later that I decided to be a lawyer, but from childhood, I knew that I loved writing and arguing and just the kind of critical thinking and issue spotting and arguing and just all the kind of nuts and bolts, the technical aspects of it. And the substance of it came much, much later for me. And part of the reason for that is I didn't know lawyers growing up, but most of the lawyers I know don't understand what I do. I have a very obscure niche that is not visible. And it's the kind of thing at parties, people are like, oh, you're a lawyer? And what do you do? And I tell them, and they're like, oh, like, it's conversation killer, because nobody knows what it is. And I would have been exactly the same way when I was 20. And I think it's okay to not know where you're going when you're 20. And in fact, I think sometimes you end up in better places when you go down paths if you can't see the end of them. And so as I learned that this job existed, I realized, oh, this is actually a great fit for me. When I went to law school, I was going to do First Amendment law. And then I took con law and was like, wait, this is just made up. This doesn't make any sense. And with like property and contracts and all the technical stuff, I really like getting into the mechanical, kind of highly technical, how does this all work together and what are the concepts? And for me, that, much to my own surprise, that was transactional law, and particularly working with businesses where it's not, somebody's life on the line. I just think it's fun. So I guess I don't, if you're like serious and worried, like I probably should have been when I was 20 or 21, I just want to put in a plug for like finding your way, learning as you go. I think stay grounded in your values, what you want from your life, and what you know about who you are, but let that lead you places you might not foresee.
Yes, thank you. I love how you wrapped up your response to that question. And I think everyone just touched on how they decided and a little bit of their goals. And, like Matthew said, 80% going in thinking, okay, here are my two options. And then it pivots a little bit. So it's kind of hybriding Claire's question, second half of her question, and Xander's question. How did you choose your area of specialty?
I don't
Go
think I
first. Oh,
chose
go
it.
ahead.
I don't think I chose it. I think it chose me. I think, one thing that I tell students that I teach is, answer these questions for yourself, and then it will guide you. Who do you want to emulate? What are your passions? And if you answer those as you traverse through your life, you will rule out a lot of things that don't speak to you. One thing that I learned pretty quickly after I graduated from law school is that it's very unique to women. Women drop out of the field left and right because they've learned that there are a lot of things that they want to do, and they don't want to do one thing for 70 hours a week and not do other things. So if it speaks to you, if it's your passion, you're going to do it, and 70 hours is not a big deal. But if 70 hours a week is a big deal for you and you want to see other people, then you're going to have to figure out what you want your life to look like and who you want to be in that life with you, whether it be animals or people. And so you start making a series of decisions as you start to grow up and say, I kind of want a house. I kind of want some people in my life that I get to see. Those decisions help you move forward. So public practice made sense to me, even though I don't work just 40 hours a week, and I never have. That's a lie. That's a myth. I think my panelists will probably in public service will agree to that. But it gives you a lot more flexibility so that I can spend time doing the things that I like. One thing that I've learned in my almost 25 years is I actually like the extracurricular things that I do probably more than I like my job. And so I want to make space for those things that really speak to who I am as a human being. As a Black woman, I feel like I have this special obligation to make the profession better for people who look like me. So that's my passion. So my answer is it's going to pick you, because if you're true to who you are, what your passions are, who you want to emulate, you will find your way.
Yeah, and I think mine, I kind of have a similar, I was going to say that I picked mine, but I think you're right that it picked me on further reflection. I landed in public service before I was even technically eligible to be certified as a student attorney. My first year, second semester of law school, I just took the word certified off and pretended it was okay. My supervisor let me do that on this license. I don't know why, but he did. And that was awesome to just like start right away, jumping in with public service, knowing that that was something I was interested in some shape. There are many forms of public service law, many, many, many. And I knew that that was something I wanted to do. So I tried that. And one of the quickest ways to get into practice as a law student is to work for a public defender's office, because surprise, they need bodies desperately. Still true, we need the licensed bodies too, but they get law students in the courtroom and give them real people to work with before you're even done with your second year of law school. When you finish your first year, you can dive right in as long as you're taking professional responsibility. They don't have those too many limits on giving you real people to help. So I did that and found out right away that I loved working through that process with those clients and being able to be that guide that I kind of referenced before, and help them make the best decision for them. Because that's my job, isn't to decide for them, right? It's to help them make the best decision they can. So that was kind of my first exposure. And then when I was working for some judges after law school, I was exposed to appellate law. So what happens after trial, after conviction, and realized that reading and writing aspect of things was much more my speed than being in a courtroom every single day, and like talking to a jury doesn't sound fun to me. So I didn't want to do that. And I kind of lucked into, with timing, a position that combined both of those loves of public defense and appellate work. and landed at the Appellate Public Defender's Office, which is small and niche. There are only like 40 of us, but somehow it worked out. It found me, and I found it. And that's kind of the trajectory, is you just feel things out. And I think that's important too, is when you're in law school, you have so much freedom to try things on. You can do something for 2 weeks, and if you hate it, leave, and there's no consequences. You don't lose your health insurance if you leave your student volunteer job, right? So like you can try out everything under the sun basically and figure out what you like and specialize as much as you want, realize you hate it, leave it, no consequences. So to those of you who do go to law school, that's another thing I would encourage, is to the extent that you can, with extracurriculars and family requirements and responsibilities outside of law school, try on as many different areas as you can to see what feels cool and what feels yucky, and then make your decisions from there.
For me, it was kind of a weird experience. So like I came into law school with the interest in politics and stuff like that. I'd always seen that on like the public side of things. I'd never thought about like professional advocacy. I met a former state senator while working on this campaign for governor, and kind of got brought in and actually got hired at the firm he was at as kind of the very junior, help everybody out on the team, logistics, coverage, monitoring kind of position. And then the week the governor's budget was being rolled out, the team's health and human services lobbyist's wife had their first child, and he was out. And they said, all right, Matthew, you're going to go sit in health and human services and tell us what's in the budget, what it means for our clients, and like prepare content that we can share to figure out where we're going. The state was facing a $6 billion deficit at the time, so it was a rough package of stuff to try and sort through. And so I did that. And then as he kind of transitioned back into work, I still covered a lot of things in that space. So I spent a lot of that legislative session in the health committee just by sheer necessity of the team. And in Minnesota legislative politics, health and human services is oftentimes seen as one of the most complicated spaces. And I was drawn to that, I think, in kind of just well, I'll never be bored. I'll always be learning. There's always going to be a need, right? This isn't something that gets done. Like we don't finish it. And so there's some value in that. And there's a little bit of a competitive side of me that was like, well, if I can be good at the hard thing, then like that makes me one of the good ones, right? Like, so there was a side of like, all right, let's take on the challenge. The interesting thing for me is that went on to be the committee I led at the legislature as staff, and where my practice has gone is in that health and human services space. But my lens on it has definitely evolved. My work in the Medicaid space has taken on kind of a different lens as far as kind of a service, or a way to use the privilege of my legal experience to the benefit of those who are navigating a complicated system. I generally represent providers, but a lot of them are nonprofit organizations that are trying to find ways to work through overlapping privacy laws and reimbursement systems and record keeping requirements and things like that to do some service. And in that, I've had opportunities, as Mitchell's comments, to do things outside of that. I serve as vice chair of the board of a nonprofit residential and outpatient substance use disorder treatment organization. And I've had the opportunity to kind of take my Medicaid lawyer hat and put it to service in a pro bono / volunteer capacity that is really meaningful, and it has felt like a way to take some of those professional experiences and expertises I have and use them, outside of my professional capacity to do something. Being a Medicaid lawyer, my wife sometimes jokes with me that I picked the one part of healthcare where there is no money, and that's in many respects true, but it's also one of those things where you see a lot of value outside of kind of just the transactional sense to the work you're doing. And for me, that part of my practice is entirely a result of a gentleman at another law firm's wife's delivery date. Theoretically, I could have very easily become an energy or a tax lawyer if somebody else had had a baby in that particular month. So there's a little bit of a stars align that gave me an opportunity, and then or some exposure I wouldn't have otherwise potentially had. But it's kind of grown from there.
Mhm. Yeah, I really like these themes of tapping into our values. What is, the top things that we value at this point in our life? And just, the way that life flows, the ebbs and flows, the events that make life what it is, that really aren't a part of the plan, but then become within the decision-making process of building a plan. And with that planning, I kind of want to take a few steps back. Jessica had a question, and then it will hopefully mold into Eva's question. But I know when I was in high school, when I was curious about a job, I went and job shadowed. I spent an afternoon or a couple hours shadowing to see what do they do all day type of exposure. So, what advice, whether it's an experience like a job shadow or an actual job that a student could get paid for, or a recent graduate that could earn money to see if law school or the law profession is a good fit for them?
I think that's a really difficult question because like medical professionals, right, to doctors, you can't just jump into it. There's a long process by which you are now anointed a doctor or anointed an attorney. And the best way to get the experience is actually to be a law student. You get so much experience as a law student. Another opportunity would be a paralegal. Paralegals, they see a lot of the same things or more than a law student would. That's a great opportunity, but then you might be pigeonholed to doing just that kind of work. What I did is I just talked to a lot of lawyers. I actually cold called a lot of lawyers because I didn't know any, and I asked a lot of questions. And actually, one of the attorneys that I reached out to was Justice Page. He was an attorney at the time and not a Supreme Court justice. And he sat down with me. One thing that I always tell students is a closed mouth is a mouth that is not fed. So if you want something, you have to ask for it. And you have to trust that people, particularly in Minnesota, don't want to say no to you. So if you want something, ask in person. Always ask in person, because it's very difficult to say no to somebody in person. And ask to shadow. But in shadow, you're just going to have a snapshot of that particular day, and you're not going to really get the benefit of what their practice looks like. And it could be very different. What I do today is going to be very different to what I do tomorrow. So there may be some opportunities, probably not as many opportunities as one would like. You really get those with being a law student or a paralegal. But sit down with people that you know or people you don't know and ask the questions you really want to ask. Do you actually like what you do? Do you like it? And if you could do this over again, would you make the same decision or would you make a different decision? And then tap into their networks. Are there other people that you think that I should talk to that would give me the kind of information that I need or want? What was really important for me as a Black woman is that I talked to Black people, because I knew that the experience as a lawyer, as a Black person, was going to be very different than other people. And it was. The information I got from Black lawyers was very different than I got from other people. That was informative. But do not be afraid to ask the questions that you really want to know the answers to.
Thank you, Dana.
I would just jump in and add that I do think, other work and volunteer experience is valuable. Things that are either maybe related to or somewhat tangentially connected to the practice of law, whether it's working in a law firm. I actually practiced law with a woman who was the front desk receptionist at my law firm when I joined 7 years ago. And she's now a third year associate in our employment group and a very talented attorney, and had been around in that experience. I started by doing a little bit of like clerk work in a law firm where I was trying to essentially using the writing and critical thinking skills of my college education to try and produce something where I didn't really need it. I was writing demand letters for auto accident cases. So I was like, okay, this, they rear-ended my client and these are the, injuries that they sustained. And I wrote it all up, went through the records and kind of did that. Whether it's, not a lot of nonprofit organizations, I get asked this a lot with a little bit of the policy lens. I'm in the advocacy space. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations that have, advocacy as part of that, and you don't need to be a lawyer to do that work. That's one of the things, I have a lot of people that ask me about what I do, and on the legislative side of things, you don't need to be a lawyer. I think personally, I'm better at it because I am a lawyer and I've got some of those issue spotting and critical thinking and communication skills. I also know there are some of the best in the business who aren't lawyers. You don't need to be a lawyer to be very good at that. And so I think getting some exposure there, and for me, there was no better opportunity than working at the legislature. I know a lot of folks will get a job working at the legislature, working in Congress, going to Washington, and they'll do that for a little while and get some understanding of either a policy area. Maybe they become super fascinated by energy regulations because they worked for the committee chair. They just listened to it for a lot. And they thought that was really interesting. And being exposed to a specific area of public policy, which almost invariably has a legal practice associated with it. And then after a couple of years of doing something like that, have decided, all right, I'm going to go to law school because I think that would be what I would like to do. And again, that gives them their purpose, their why at the end of that legal education experience. So finding things that expose you to what could be those areas of practice, and then figuring out whether it's sufficient to take that step is one other way of going about it.
If I could just jump in, I want to really emphasize, Dana has said this really well too, but it's really hard to foresee the people part of things. And that is such a critical part of how your path goes. I think I could be happy doing a lot of different types of substantive law, but there are many kind of interpersonal environments that I would not be happy in. So when you're looking at people who you want to shadow or who you want to connect with, look at their whole lives and think about, like Dana said, emulating and think about, is this somebody who I really kind of want to learn from, or are they a cautionary tale? And you learn from those too. But, do they see their kids? Are you, do they have hobbies? Do they have friends? Are they, whatever you care about. I mean, I'm not someone who wants to work all the time. I put in a little plug for in-house practice here. I generally do work 40 hours a week. And so I can do my music and I can hang out with my kids and read books and kind of keep that liberal arts lifestyle going. So I would, kind of both for purposes of identifying mentors and for kind of finding your path, follow the people who speak to you, because that's kind of the best information. There's a lot of unhappy lawyers out there and you probably don't want to turn into one of them. And I'll just throw in a plug too for the alumni network. I love hearing from Macalester students. I am always happy to have coffee and just kind of be really frank about my experience. So I very rarely will say no to that type of outreach.
Perfect.
Yeah, I wanted to put another plug in for that as well. That was one kind of piggybacking on a couple of different things here that have been said. When I was trying to figure out, do I actually want to go to law school? I did a search through, I think it was through Career Exploration, through, we called it CDC back then, but Career Development Center. But they pulled a list for me of people of alumni in specific areas, like geographically, that I thought I would want to be in, who had specific training. So I talked to people who had psychology training and I talked to people who had legal training. And they like the list that I got had their contact information, it had their majors, it had all sorts of, like, it had what they're doing now. It was awesome. And I could email them and say, hey, so and so, like, I'm a student at Mac, or I just graduated. I want to talk to you about your career, or do you have a few minutes or something? And some people set up phone calls, some people set up coffees, some people just sent back an email. But everyone is willing to say something. And even the slightest information, lawyers, okay, fun fact, lawyers love to talk about themselves. Like, that is just, most lawyers are willing to talk until the day ends about what they do, and why they do it and how they got there. Exhibits A, B, C, and D. But anyway, we will love to talk to you about that. And Mac grads especially love to talk to Mac grads. I have actually already taught to Macs. I teach a clinic at my school through my office at Mitchell Hamlin. I've already taught to Mac grads in that clinic, even though it's only a clinic of 4 students. Somehow we find each other, right? So Mac students, we're there for each other no matter how long we've been out. So take advantage of that for sure.
I had 3 interns when I worked at the legislature, and one of them was a Macalester student.
Right? The odds are just somehow astronomically low, but it happens every time.
Yeah. On that note, panelists, if you want to add your name and your email address to the chat, I think that would be particularly helpful as well. I know I want to get to Eva's question, and I was direct message another 3 questions, and we're running low on time, so let's try to get through as much as we can. For Eva's question, I want to take the liberty, if it's okay, to adjust it a little bit based upon some of the themes where sometimes stars align, things fall into place, understand your values, talk to people, do informational interviews, gather as much information as you can, and at the end of the day, know who you are and know what you're looking for. And so, what questions would you recommend students ask themselves if they're trying to decide if they want to take a break before going to law school or just jump into law school after they graduate?
Are you tired? Really? Are you tired? Because sometimes you just need to root in order to ascend. And rooting means I have the nutrition, I have the sun, I have whatever I need to be okay. If you're going into law school and you don't feel okay, I assure you it won't get better. So make sure that you're in a great place emotionally, financially, before you start this 3-year odyssey where you don't know what's going to happen, and you certainly don't know what's going to happen at the other end. But it really is about, are you okay? And if you're not, work really hard to be okay before you start this venture.
I'm super glad that I took a couple of years in between. Law school is nuts, especially the first year of law school. It's just this miasma of fear and insecurity. And having a couple of years of experience outside of the student environment gave me a little bit of distance from that and a life outside of it. So I just treated it like a job and did my work from 9 to 5. And then I went home and had a normal life. And I think that spared me some of the worst of that stress and just gave me a little bit broader perspective than I had. Some people maybe don't need 2 more years to get that perspective, but it helped me. So I completely agree. You need to have a way to kind of maintain some distance from the very skewed perspective that is particularly the first year of law school.
The thing I think I would add on top of that is not everyone will be all right when they go into it, to Dana's comments. And it's very easy when everyone else is running around completely losing their mind. I mean, I remember one good friend going into finals of the first year of law school who was studying 18 hours a day and hadn't put on real pants. And we were like, dude, this is the first of 4. Like, this is going on for another week and a half, buddy. Like we sat down with him and we're like, go home, take a shower, have a nap. Like that this is not. And so to some extent, being able to know that there's that sentiment can be contagious. So going into it with a little bit of extra eye on self-care. And for me, that actually meant leaving law school at one point. I mean, that like I hit a low part in my life in that first half of law school, and I left and did something that I fell in love with. It was an exciting opportunity, and it gave me a different perspective. So that, like Betsy said, when I went back, law school is what I did after work. It wasn't how I defined myself. It was about a means to an end. So it was about finishing that degree, right? And so suddenly my well, I got to graduate at the top of the class. No, I don't. I need the law degree, because once you're admitted to the bar, then you start working and you start finding those experiences, and eventually people start hiring you for who you are and what you bring to the table, not necessarily like what that GPA might be. So for me, there it kind of flipped the paradigm a little bit. So when you're kind of like looking in at yourself, it's also recognizing, frankly, that none of these decisions are permanent. I think one of the things when I have a lot of these coffees in interviews, and I could not agree with that, like reach out, people will always sit down. But one of the things I think a lot of folks think is like that first decision, do I go to law school or not? Well, you may make that decision once in the spring of your senior year of college. And if the answer is no, that doesn't mean you won't decide at some point down the road. That also doesn't mean that if you say yes, well, you have to finish it. No, you don't. If you decide to take a job, that's not your forever job. It's not your forever career. Like you have, and I think this is one of the benefits of some of the skills that come from liberal arts, is the ability to chart that course that you're passionate about, and finding these other opportunities, and you're never locked in. I mean, I think too often, we can feel that like, well, I do this and then I have to do that, and that's the next step. I got to college, now it's graduate school. Doesn't have to be. It can be, and it can be now. It can be in 2 years. It can be in 10 years. There isn't a kind of a linear progression. And I think oftentimes, in my experience, talking to a lot of Macalester students in similar situations, it's been such a linear progression for all of us getting to that point. Grades in high school, activities in high school to get into a good college, grades in college, that it's hard to shift off of that paradigm a little bit. And so the thing I would say is the question you should ask yourself is, why am I even thinking about these things, right? Is it because I want to? Am I excited about it? Or is it because somewhere in my head, I feel like, well, that's the next step? Because to be frank, there is no next step. There are an infinite number of next steps, and there are steps that follow those, right? None of them are binding or permanent. And so, you can figure it out as you go.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Matthew. We have about 5 minutes to go. And so Marcos is going to put an evaluation link in the chat. Students, if you wouldn't mind taking a couple seconds and completing that. I have one more question that I do want to ask the panel. It was submitted by a student. When you think about early in your careers, you're trying to show your worth, or you're really excited because you're finally getting to do the work that you're so passionate about doing or making change. How did you handle your work-life balance when you're trying to prove your worth or get your hands wet? What did that look like for you?
I was tired. I was very, very tired. Looking back, I think moderation is always important, but you don't have that perspective when you first start out. You think that it's this or bust, and it really isn't. I wish I had the maturity I have now than I back then, so I could have said, I don't need to work 70 hours a week. I just need to find a different job. I always say the goal is to be a lawyer or in the legal field, but you can change the plan. The goal is the same, but the plan can be very different if you are feeling really burnt out. And you can easily feel very burnt out. And when you do, You need to take a step back and say, is this what I want to do? Or is this just a moment? You can get through moments, but if this truly is what your life is going to look like professionally, that's when you need to take inventory and stock and pivot.
So that's really hitting hard with me right now because I am in that exact moment in my career. Wait a minute. And part of that is precipitated by the fact that public defenders are potentially looking at going on strike soon because our board is not negotiating with us in a way that treats us as adults. And they're not paying us well, and they're not prioritizing experienced attorneys. They just want to churn new baby lawyers through until they work them to the bone and then they leave. I think I heard a statistic recently that 40% of the public defenders in the state of Minnesota have been hired within the last 5 years. Turnover is intense. People leave usually within 3 to 5, and I'm at 4.5 right now. So that's a really great question, and I don't know the answer. I think the answer is, as Dana said, like, you got to figure out what your values are. And we've been saying that the whole time through. I think that's something you won't hear from a lot of lawyers who didn't come from a McAllister background. Honestly, there are a lot of lawyers out there who will not tell you that it's about values because they don't see it that way. They see it as, this is how I make my money, or this is how I pay for the things that I like to do, which is totally fine. But I think McAllister kind of instills that importance of values and themes, and being aware of that and how things matter to your own mental health. So I think, everybody's going to handle it a different way. Some people handle it by leaving completely. Right now, I'm handling it by getting super involved in our union fight and trying to get back at our overlords. But there's different ways. TBD if that's a healthy way to do it or not. I will let you know in a year. I don't know when this is going to be over. But yeah, it's a great question to have. It's very important to ask that now, because you've had a work-life balance at McAllister, right? Like, how hard things can be. How studying is. It's just going to be more of that with different kinds of work and different kinds of things vying for your time. So it's very personal. And I know that's not a satisfying answer, but that's my 2 cents.
I just want to interrupt and say, I'm sorry if that's happening to you.
Thanks.
And I really wish you the best as you try to sort this out, and then you will be in the best position to share that with other people. But thank you for being so genuine and honest about where you are. And I just want to throw my support to you.
Thank you.
The one thing I would say real quickly before, unfortunately, I have a hard stop affiliated with a legislator meeting. But for me, when I got into private practice, I really enjoyed kind of the hustle and the entrepreneurial side of things. And so that early part of my practice, I was very excited about that. And I'm less than a month away from becoming a partner at my law firm. And so it's been exciting. But 18 months ago, my wife and I had our first child, and that will definitely change what because she has a career that she loves and takes time outside of 40 hours a week, and so did I. And then you have to figure out how you navigate that. And again, I think that's part of it, is there's no permanent decision. I've got very good friends from law school who are in private practice, and then they had a couple of kids and decided, I'm going in-house because I want to be able to walk away at 5 o'clock. That's, I don't want to do marketing that's not billable, that doesn't show up, that has to be part of that. That's not what I want to do. And they made those decisions, and they had been successful in private practice and decided still that was where they wanted other values. So again, before I jump off, I can't emphasize enough that there's no permanency to any of that, and you're always reevaluating and checking in, and it's okay to decide that something's not for you, right? Private practice, I've worked with a lot of very talented lawyers who decided that's just not my thing, and there are other pieces to it, and I'm going to go do something else. And that didn't mean that they failed in private practice by any means. They were very talented, successful, and could have continued to be. But it's okay to rule things out along the way as well. So with that, I have to jump off. I appreciate you all having.
Thank you so much, Matt. Enjoy the rest of your day. Appreciate your time. And thank you to our remaining panelists. Dana, Betsy, Abigail, you all were incredibly insightful and thoughtful and very giving of providing a very transparent and holistic look for the students who are pursuing or considering legal profession. So thank you on behalf of Career Exploration. We appreciate you. We appreciate you sharing your email contact information with students. And we're empowering students to go on our website and to utilize the resources we have available. So you do feel comfortable and you know what to say or how to approach people so they talk about themselves to help you with your decision-making process. We love being able to promote and showcase the things that we do in our office. So for those of you who do feel comfortable, we will stop the recording. But if you do want to turn on